This is Fantology.
You may have heard of us.
All right, what's up, Drawlade? This is Steven, your host with Tonality Podcast. I have my lifelong friends, Ryan and Josh, here with me, and we're talking about book one of The Bound and the Broken of Blood and Fire by Ryan Cahill. This is a book that goes on for, it's the first book. There's several more in the series. I don't know offhand how many there are, but I know it's like an ongoing series, and I've heard a lot about it. And unfortunately, like my expectations were pretty high because a lot of people have really talked about this series as something that's pretty special. We'll start off with some non-spoiler stuff, but what did you guys think of the series? Just for some context, Josh and I read the first book only. And Ryan, how many have you read? Are you current?
I'm not current. I've read the first book. I basically read the first two books and the novellas that come after them.
Okay.
So I'm reading the third book, but that's like significantly longer than the other ones.
And is that the most recent, or is there a fourth as well?
He's written the novella after the third book, and then there's going to be a fourth book, but that has not been released.
Okay. So you're almost current. You know some stuff that we don't, but you're going to keep it to a Blood and Fire only.
Yes.
So as someone who's read a few, obviously you liked it enough to continue. You're enjoying the series.
Yeah, I enjoy the series. I think that I agree with what you said, Stephen. Just that I had heard a good amount of positive reviews on this, and I think the book was very rough around the edges, which is, I think, to be expected from a debut novel from a self-published author. But I could definitely see a lot of people not agreeing or not liking the quality and DNFing the book. I personally I love like Dragon Riders and books that delve into that specific bond, and that is what kept me going throughout the first book.
Josh, your thoughts?
Yeah, I've struggled with my thoughts for this book. There are some things I really enjoyed about it, and other things that I did not enjoy about it. And broadly, like, I don't know if I'm going to keep reading the series or not. I kind of got like maybe 5% to the second book and have DNF'd it for now. And that's not to say I won't pick it up later, but so that's kind of where I'm at with the series as a whole. We can get more specific to the book, to the first book, because broadly, like I'm not quite as fascinated by the dragons and stuff as Ryan is, but I obviously enjoy those kind of like classic fantasy motifs. I thought a lot of them were done really well here. Yeah, it's kind of confusing to me because like there's no one thing that I'm like really turned off by the books besides there being a lot of tropes used, but that's not necessarily a bad thing or anything. Anyway, so I'm hoping that the conversation today can kind of help me sort out my feelings about the book kind of, and why I'm having a harder time continuing on with the series.
When I was reading it, I had some negative feedback for sure. I think you guys might have seen that a little bit. I didn't super love it. And I think most of my issue was it just felt very, very derivative to, books that I've seen before, but like specifically very derivative to Aragon, which was written by, how old was Christopher Polini when he published that? Like 14 or something? Like super young. Maybe that's an exaggeration. Anyway, when something is like so derivative to a book that was basically written by a teenager 20 years ago, and Aragon was the hit of that few years there, kind of, I feel like that was it a little post Harry Potter? It was kind of like simultaneous. with Harry
It
Potter.
was like the
There's-
post like huge Harry Potter rush, but I think it was probably around
Okay.
like when the fourth one was being published
Yeah.
or something.
I mean, when Aragon
Mhm.
was coming out, it was like everyone had the book with the colorful dragon on it. It was really big. And I just feel like this story was so derivative to that. And I'm fine with, obviously tropes are going to get reused. Like that's just the nature, that's how it works. But in this case, it felt like too much to me. And it wasn't even copying anything that I like super, super love. So that also kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
Aragon was probably my favorite series in like middle school and
Yeah, no, I
going into
loved it
high
as a
school.
kid, but I feel like I really doubt it holds up.
Maybe not.
You're gonna have people coming after you for that take, Steven.
The next book is coming out in like a month.
Is there
And
another Aragon book coming out?
Yeah.
it's
Oh.
it's called Murtagh. It's I think it's supposed to take place after. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
want to say
Are we
something
gonna
wrong.
it's
are we
after
gonna
the
cover
events.
this? I feel like we should have some Aragon books.
Well, Steven just
I'm
called
gonna
out
read
the
it.
series as a whole, saying
Here's the thing, though.
it definitely
Like,
doesn't hold up.
maybe I shouldn't have said something that strong. My remembering is that I really didn't like Inheritance. I felt like it ended very poorly. And I've read a lot of really good books since, and I just have a hard time believing that series would
Well, it's a young
rank
adult
super
series,
well with.
Steven.
Yeah, that's true. That's
It's
true.
kind of meant for
Yeah.
kids. I mean, not like children,
Yeah.
but it's like I
Yeah.
would say it's like young adult, if not like what's the one like slightly below
No, it's young
adult?
adult. It's not middle grade. It's definitely
It's not
young
middle
adult.
grade.
I
No.
agree with Steven's opinion based on the last book. But Christopher Paolini, I think, has grown a lot as an author. He wrote To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, and I
Yeah,
think
did you read
Fractal
that?
Noise. No, I didn't, but I've heard good things about
I
it.
read
And
it. I read it and I liked it.
and so I think he's gained a
Steven's
lot of
trying to flex his-
experience and maturity.
So yeah, I'm trying to deflect from all the Christopher Pliny fans because I know there's a lot of them that probably hate me right now. But I read To Sleep in a Sea of Stars and I liked it. I have not yet read Fractal Noise, but I plan on reading it. And obviously that's more of a sci-fi. And I also plan on reading Murtagh. Like I don't hate Polini by any means. I don't know. Maybe I've just grown
I
out
know
of
what
the
you're
young
saying,
adult.
Steven. It's like
yeah.
It's like, are we really reading a book that's kind of a knockoff of another book that's kind of we've moved on past?
Yeah, moved on
saying?
past. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm planning on. I can't wait until Liam. I don't know if this won't make it into the recording, I'm sure, but Liam, my 6-year-old, he's been listening to the Harry Potter books on audio like before he goes to bed. And
Mhm.
he just came in. He was supposed to be asleep right now, but he just came in super excited about the fact that he just finished the first Harry Potter book. So I'm like, like fills my heart with a lot of joy, and I'm excited to share Aragon with him in a couple of years
Yeah.
because I think that's a little bit
And
older.
they're coming out with the Aragon TV show.
Okay, so yeah,
So,
I'm
Yeah.
Anyway, we should probably get back to.
Sorry, I just mean, Liam can
Yeah.
watch that theoretically.
But this is, it is definitely a conversation we have to have about this book because it does wear its influences on its sleeve. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I do feel like it is kind of like, okay, the people that loved Aragon are now adults. So like he put like adult things in this book, not
Mhm.
to like a crazy high extent, but like enough that
Fourth
it's
wing
noticeable.
adult themes.
No, I don't think that there's any sexual, like explicit
Not
sexual
really.
stuff.
It's
But
just
there's
more violent and there's swearing.
there's swearing, the violence like gets pretty intense, sometimes just
Mhm.
and enough so that it kind of takes you back because I guess like when you're living in a world like the First Law, you kind of get numb to the violence because like there's so much of it, but like in this, when violence happens and it's described in pretty gruesome detail, it kind of took me out of it kind of because the rest of the world didn't feel that gritty. And
Yeah, I
so
feel like you have to balance the level of violence you want to show with like your overall tone of the book you're writing.
yeah, anyway, so that was kind of interesting. And obviously like I don't really care about violence in books, but I just felt like the tonality was a little bit weird with it. that's like kind of a general criticism. Same thing kind of with the language. It's like, swear word, like I don't mind swear words in fantasy, but when it's like written in kind of a, I don't know, when it's written in a certain way, and then all of a sudden you're just like, there's just F-bombs being dropped that come out of kind of nowhere without the rest of the book really
It
being there
seems
to
like
back it
classical. It seems like classical fantasy. Like you're reading it and it's like, okay, this is, Wheel of Time. This is Aragon. This is kind of, the fantasy of a few years ago, which is fine. Obviously, we like that stuff. But then all of a sudden it's like F this, F that. And you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Shouldn't it be like storm it?
Yeah. Like some in world swears, which I'm not saying everything needs to have in world swears. Not everything needs to be like Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson and stuff,
Right.
But it's just the tone never, I never felt like I knew what kind of book I was tonally reading, if that makes sense.
That's fair. Yeah, I think that's fair. Ryan, do you feel like it resolves that later on? Like, do you have more of a feel of the bound and the broken world now that you've read more?
Yeah, I think I do, but I don't think those things bothered me as much when I read the first book. I think I was bothered more by other things. So I think I was able to look past maybe more of these flaws that you guys had when you were reading. I mean, on Goodreads, I gave it like a 3 out of 5. So it's like a 6. This book was like a 6 out of 10 for me. I felt like it was a big step up in when I read The Fall, which is the novella that he wrote after, but is actually a prequel novella. And I feel like he's improved a lot as an author since, in my opinion, and his writing shows that. Not that it necessarily justifies reading the first book. I mean, I don't necessarily know that that's a great excuse for a lot of people, is to say it gets good in the second or third or fourth book, so you got to stick it through the first 3.
No, I think that's totally fine to say, honestly. And also, this is the first published book from him, right? So
Yeah.
like, I should have some more grace with some of this tonality stuff. It's a really hard thing to do.
Right.
I guess I just was pointing it out, and I think it's totally fine to say, hey, this is his first published book. It's a little bit rough. Like by the time the second, third book comes around, it gets really good. I think that's totally fine, and people can decide if they want to read it or not based on that advice. But
yeah,
there's definitely some awkward wordings and things that you could tell you needed a little more editing, and that makes sense in the first book. So
I
I'm
think
sure once you got a
really
line editor,
surprised by it because of the things that we had heard, like the praise we had heard for the books.
Yeah.
We weren't we were caught off guard at
I think that was more, I was almost expecting like a Rothfuss level like intro to like a masterpiece, and it just definitely wasn't that. There, like you're saying, Stephen, a line editor, there was one passage, I think this is an exact quote, his slick black hair was slicked back against his head, like using the same like like just obviously repetitiveness in the same sentence, and it just kind of caught me off guard when I was reading it, and I made like kind of a mental note of it, which again, this is all totally fine, especially for like a brand new author. It's just I think my expectations for the book were higher than what it was.
Yeah, I mean, turns out it's tough to write a huge fantasy book. And obviously, if you don't have a line editor or it's your first book, those things are going to happen. So, yeah, we're not going to harp on that. But I think we just bring it up to say, that's part of the experience. Like if you're going into reading the book, that's something that will probably take you out of it a little bit. Because,
I think
unfortunately, when you come into that, when you read stuff and it's just kind of awkward, you're like, you're snapped out of the world and suddenly the book's not as good.
I think if someone had told me, hey, this is a really good book, it's his first book, he was self-published, he didn't really have, he might have had an editor, we should say, like he probably had an editor go through the book, but like, he's not having like a world-class editor or whatever, like, and just having somebody give me a heads up that there's some kind of clunky, rough, could be refined prose about it, then it would have been it just would have been a lot easier for me to digest that.
Right. Like that expectation would have been better than this big series that everyone's talking about, and there's this like gorgeous special edition of the book that's available even, and it just makes you think like
Stephen bought.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, it looked really pretty, so I had to buy it.
And you had heard good things about it.
And I don't regret buying it. It's a really pretty book, and anyway, that just makes me think like, why? I'm just kind of confused after reading it. And like Ryan said, it sounds like it gets better, and that's great. And I'm glad that there are so many fans of it, and people that are willing to stick with it. So, maybe in the future I will be one of those people. But after reading the first book, I'm just kind of confused.
Yeah, I think that's where
I thought that the ending really picked up and started more to show, at least in my opinion, it started to show me more of what he was capable of.
Here's one critique of the way that they structured this audiobook. The ending caught me off guard because they included what was the name of the novella, Ryan?
The Fall.
The Fall. They included the fall at the ending of the version of the audiobook I read. So I thought I had another hour of the book left, and it ended. And so it's just kind of weird, like I think that messed with the ending for me, because I expected like something else to happen, I still had like 10% of the book left or something. And so like maybe just like in the forward of the audiobook, just being like included in this special edition of the audiobook is a novella at the end. That way you can just know that like you can just have proper expectations for it. I don't know. It's obviously my fault too, but like nevertheless, that like did affect my enjoyment of the ending.
That would be weird. That happens in ebooks sometimes too, where the last like 5 to 10% is like the first chapter of the author's next book or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I've definitely ran into that before. But yeah, Brian, I think the ending was good. It was definitely, stuff was happening. The dragon, I don't remember many characters' names. The dragon was bigger.
Valeris.
Yeah.
Just make up a fantasy name, Steven. You'll probably be like pretty ballpark.
Yeah. Yeah, Valeris could be straight out of George R. R. Martin as well. Anyway, yeah, I'm glad that ending was so action-packed, because the middle section definitely dragged, and I think the thing that I struggled with in the middle section was a lot of the chapters kind of became the same thing, where it was like we're sitting down at the camp to have a conversation, and in this conversation we're going to learn a little bit more. And then 2 chapters later, again, it's a conversation around the campfire, and then another one. And there just needed to be a little more variety to what was happening to add some spice into the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I honestly, like, I read this book maybe a month and a half ago, or maybe 2 months ago, and like I can't remember much of the middle of the book. So
it was a lot of traveling around, learning a little bit here and there. Yeah. I mean, I don't remember too much of it either, but
that's a 10 out of 10 for the map in the book. I don't know if you saw the map or if you guys listened, but it's a very intricate and well done map. And I am interested to learn more about the world, because it seems like the history of the whole disaster that happened years ago kind of affects the areas that you're able to travel through. And I think that's interesting. I think that the thing that I enjoy the most, thing that I'm most intrigued by, is the whole lore to everything, because it seems like a really cool story. Like these dragon riders of the past, they were betrayed. I mean, it's essentially the same story as Galatorix and Aragon, but nonetheless, that is a cool story. And hopefully there's some twists to it that are not in Aragon.
You should read or listen to the Fall novella, Stephen.
Okay. It sounds like that's the thing for you that like got you, that sold you on the series a little more.
Yeah. I think so. Which it sounds like it wasn't that way for Josh. So
Well, I didn't mind the fall. I just was saying it kind of messed with my perception of the ending of Fire and
yeah.
Blood. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
I thought the fall was good. I just I was expecting it to be the ending of the book, not a novella.
Mhm.
I think of the three boys, I'm most interested in Wrist right now because he seems to be on a journey that I'm not as familiar with. Like I don't know what's going to happen with him, and he was intriguing right from the beginning when he was flashing magic potential around, and then he got taken away, and now he's kind of almost being brainwashed. Or we're not really, yeah, we're not sure what's going on with him. I feel like maybe more of that in this book would have been nice, a little more even balance between the main
Mhm.
characters. But as
Yeah.
far as Kalen, like he just kind of seemed pretty straightforward, and he's the hero and he's the farm boy and he's growing into it. Like there's no real twists and turns there with him.
Yeah. I so this we've already talked about. This is very derivative, which in and of itself isn't really a bad thing. I think if you know that going into the book, and you're okay with that, then it won't bother you. I think that type of thing can be something that bothers people though. The other way that I would probably use to describe this book was like fairly simple, like plot. It wasn't There wasn't like a lot of intrigue and like twists. It's kind of like point A to point B. You weren't super surprised by the actions that happened. It's just kind of like cool. I don't know. I mean, and maybe that kind of led a little bit more to the tone of the book that you guys were thinking of, where it sometimes felt like it was a little bit more YA than adult at parts.
Yeah. Because adult fantasy nowadays, it almost has to have this like twisting complexity to your epic fantasy plot.
Yeah, it's like all the setup and the world building is fun, but it's like the huge payoff at the end is kind of where like things start to come together and click. That's a lot of why I read epic fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think a simpler story is a bad thing by any means. And definitely, if I continue reading, like this seems like a good candidate to listen to because I often have a hard time paying total attention to what I'm listening to. I'll admit I definitely do not absorb all the details when I'm just listening. So this seems like one that I should be able to just flip on and get the story pretty well through.
I'd imagine so. I mean, I listened to the first one and I don't feel like I do kind of feel like it was forgettable in some ways, but it sounds like you guys have that same feeling too, even though you read it, Stephen. Um, but like I never felt like I was lost in the story while I was listening to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Brian, is in the future books, what is it that what is it that you enjoy more? Like does the plot start to get a little less derivative? Do the characters come into themselves more? Is there just
It,
like cool dragon action
it's
that keeps you
definitely
reading?
it's definitely a lot less derivative in future books. I mean, when I was reading of Blood and Fire, I kept thinking to myself, wow, this is just like Aragon. Wow, this feels a lot like Wheel of Time. Wow, this reminds me of like this aspect of Stormlight Archive, and
Mm-hmm.
I think most, if not all of that was kind of eliminated for me in the fall novella and in the second book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that it definitely becomes less derivative, a bit more complicated. The characters become more interesting, and we start to learn more about their backstories. And there's more of the, dragon rider action. So
Does the sister do more, Ella?
yes,
I,
she
I was
does.
needing more from the sister too. I was engaged by the sister story. I just felt like we didn't get a lot from it.
I think
What
she has some
happens
good
at the
setup.
end of the book with his sister? Just
She's
So
on a
Rhett,
boat.
Rhett gets
Okay.
killed. She
Yeah.
joins up with the other widow of the other man that was killed in that whole conflict. And they're headed off to like they get on the boat that the rich uncle purchased for them in Giza, I think is the name of the place. Anyway,
Yeah.
and it seems like Ella is kind of coming into herself as she's hardened a lot and she seems like she's now going to be a pretty capable character. That said, like I have no idea where her story is going.
Well,
The other characters seem to have pretty distinct goals in mind, but she could do anything.
the big thing that you might have missed about
Yeah.
that was that she gets on the boat with Farda, who's the guy who
Oh yeah. That's right.
who's
Yeah,
like flipping the coin.
the Inquisitor
Yeah.
dude.
The one that killed her parents, right? Or the one that was there while her parents were.
Yeah,
I think he
Yeah.
killed her. He killed
He killed
dad.
her dad, I'm pretty sure, and
Yeah.
then the Inquisitor killed the mom.
Yeah. Yeah. That was cool.
and there was
To
some
me, he's a
good.
white. He's like in my head as a white cloak. Like,
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, he's a good character. He's interesting. He was the one that the Fade, he was hanging out with the Fade and trying to figure out what they were going to do about Kaylin, right?
yeah,
Yeah. But there was some good dramatic irony where they were in the city. Ella and Kaylin and crew were in what, Camelin? Like it's literally called Camelin at the same time. And they didn't know that they were there. And Kaylin thinks that she died. And so, there's some good setup for some things that could happen in the future, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing I like is that, or that I like in future books, is you get a lot more perspectives from the Empire. You learn more about Rist, and what he's going through, and still not quite as much as you probably would like, Stephen, but it does improve a lot in the second book.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
it's kind of satisfying to me as a reader, to see like a new author like figure things out and like come into their own a bit more, figure things out, figure out plotting, character work, and it is fun to be along for the ride, and maybe give me hope one day that I'll do the same.
Oh yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, Josh and I am officially on the journey with like 3 paragraphs written. And it's really hard, right? And Josh, you've written a lot more. And I think you would agree
And
that it's really
to be
hard.
clear, I was giving him. I was talking bad about prose. My prose, if I could be as nearly as good as him, I would consider it a huge success. So let me just put that out there.
Your characters slick back their hair like
Yeah,
3 times
my
in a
character is
sentence.
slick black hair. Yeah,
They slick back their slick hair as they slip on the slip and slide
yeah. Seriously,
down the slippery pathway, something like
yeah.
that.
But 100%. Like if I got my prose anywhere near as good as this was, that would be awesome. So yeah.
But yeah, I'd like that sentiment, Ryan. And obviously he has figured something out because it seems like there's a really big following around him. I don't know, maybe I'm making this up and these books are not as big as I'm thinking they were, but I mean, for as much as I'm on social media and kind of this world, I see this one a lot, which makes me feel like a lot of people really love it. So I don't know. Am I wrong? Like, is there a big, you're on Reddit a lot. Is there a big subreddit around Bound and Broken?
I actually am not on Reddit as much as I used to be. Um,
Cutting
I,
back.
I think there's a decent sized subreddit, but I haven't spent a lot of time seeking it out. I think it's hard because we are in like these epic fantasy circles. So it's like people who we like, authors we hear all the time. If we talk about them like outside of our circles, like nobody knows who those authors
Yeah,
are.
right.
Like
The only one anyone ever knows is Brandon Sanderson
Or George
and
Yeah.
George
George
R. R.
and
Martin.
George R. R. Martin.
Yeah.
Other than that, no
Yeah.
one's gonna know any of them.
yeah, so it is kind of like sometimes I feel like our idea of how popular an author can be, it might be a little bit inflated.
Right.
Kind of, but
And
it's just to push back on that a little bit. I think he's doing this full time now, right?
yeah, I think he is as well.
So I mean, if you can make it full time as an author, that means you're pretty popular.
I guess I'm trying to say like in our circles, he's like fairly popular.
He's not a household. He's far from being a household name, though.
Yeah, he's far from a household name.
But if you're a household name, then you're rich and famous.
It means
You're
you have an
successful if
adaptation.
you.
That's true.
Yeah.
You're only a household name. If you're a fantasy writer and you're a household name, you have an adaptation.
Sanderson doesn't.
Well, Sanderson's kind of a unique case because the Kickstarter thing, and I don't know. There's just
And finishing up Wheel of Time, which
he
is
does
a
kind of
pretty-
have an adaptation, right? And
But he was-
he's big on YouTube, and he's just like does enough stuff. I mean, out of all the authors we cover, he's very unique in that he's got his own company and just pumps up books like crazy, and he's got his whole
Yeah, and I'm not saying he doesn't deserve to be.
Yeah,
I'm just saying you can do it without taking Hollywood's money,
yeah, but I'm just saying that is very rare, and Brandon is the exception, and he won't be for very long because he will have an adaptation pretty soon.
No, you know what? I think you're wrong. I'm pushing you back at that. Like
Really?
What Sarah J. Maas? She doesn't have an adaptation. Lee Bardugo just barely got an adaptation a few years ago, but she was pretty big
Okay.
before that.
Okay, that's fair.
I think a lot of these. I think there's a lot of authors that have maybe not like high fantasy authors, but there's
They
a lot
don't-
of like.
yeah, they're not
Sarah
as much
J.
high
Maas
fantasy.
is gonna have an adaptation soon.
She will. She probably could right now. She's probably optioned off her
I
stuff.
think it's it's being worked on.
But I'm just saying that like you will obviously it's going to follow that if you have super popular work, there's going to be wanting to have an adaptation made. But I think you're putting the cart before the horse a little bit. Like I think you get to be a
that's
household,
fair.
almost a household name, and then you get an adaptation.
I guess I'm talking about specifically epic fantasy because that's the genre that I love and spend the most time with. But yeah, if you get into more of romantasy or more of kind of YA or more of the mass appeal type fantasy, then yeah. If you can make it on Book Talk, I guess is what I'm trying to get at, then you can be famous without Hollywood.
You just need the Chinese money, not the Hollywood money.
All right, what else do we have to say about Of Blood and Fire?
Yeah, we're way off topic here.
I think that I have said pretty much everything I can say about this book. It's a fairly simple read, derivative. It's slow at parts, rough around the edges. In my opinion, it's worth it to get through.
And I think it's enjoyable. I enjoyed it.
It's enjoyable. It's got dragons. It's got stuff that you're familiar with.
It's got
if
elves,
you've read,
dwarves.
if you've read Lord of the Rings, if you read fantasy when you were a kid and you're like, give me another book that's kind of like the stuff that I already read. Like, yeah, totally. Try this one out.
You like Aragon, and you're open to seeing some of those themes replicated.
Right. Yeah, I think there's definitely a place for the series, and despite our criticism and confusion, I mean, that does not mean it's not worthy of being read, for sure.
Here's kind of a weird way. Like, I think if you haven't read a lot of fantasy, you'd really like it. Like if you had read Aragon when you were a kid,
yeah.
and then I think if you've read a ton of fantasy and you're looking for like what's something that I can kind of read, I've already read a ton and I just kind of need something that like is an easy digestible thing, and you know the tropes well enough that like you don't mind seeing them done out. I think you might like it then as well. Like if you've exhausted a lot of like the huge fantasy authors, I think there's like a pretty big middle ground, which is I think kind of where I'm at, where I've read a lot of fantasy, but I have a lot of authors that I really still want to read. So like taking time to read this is taking time away from, it's like preventing me from reading other things I really want to read. So I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I think I'm kind of at a tricky spot for it, but
Yeah, no, I think I see what you're trying to say. And I think I'm kind of in the same boat where at this point I like seeing unique twists on stuff. And I think there's plenty of room to do that. Like even, I mean, Ryan and I just talked about The Will of the Many. And even though that is very similar to Red Rising and Name of the Wind, like I feel like it's its own thing enough. So there's a lot of series that are doing that. And at this point, I'm just a little more interested in that type of reading.
yeah.
Yeah.
Dang, I feel like this was less of a review of Blood and Fire and more of like a where does it sit in the current fantasy landscape. But
I don't know. We talked a lot about
yeah,
the book on its own.
sweet.
If we continue getting into the series, then we can break down the plot points more. I just didn't have like much to speculate on because kind of maybe say it's a little more straightforward. Anyway, all right. Thank you for listening, watching. If you want to talk more, if you want to tell us, what we missed in this review or why we're wrong, certainly we welcome that, as long as you can do so with just a little hint of grace is always nice on the internet. But you can drop us a comment on YouTube or join our Discord, which invites are in the episode description. Josh, Ryan, thanks guys. See you later.
Thanks, man.
Till next time.